Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jim Geraghty.
Everyone, if you could start taking your seats. I appreciate the standing ovation. As you know, I am Jim Geraghty, and you are stuck with me until noon. Now, I don't want to brag, but those of you who were here last night will know that I was the one who got to interview Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. And even better today, I have the honor, the privilege, and the thrill of interviewing an Emmy award-winning television anchor and Florida's First Lady Casey DeSantis. Oh, and it turns out her husband Ron will be here too. Now, I know you're all wondering, how did Charlie Cook not get this gig? Charlie was born in Britain, but he is the most Florida man who has ever lived. And I want to reassure everyone, you saw him earlier this morning, he was not involved in a terrible high-speed illegal golf cart accident. Nor did he fly off one of those roller coasters he's always trying to convince people to get on. I believe Charlie would be here, but otherwise he and Luther Ray Abel are filming a cross-country road trip buddy cop movie for Netflix. But wouldn't that be awesome? I'm supposed to introduce the DeSantises, but you know darn well who they are, and I bet there's a really good chance that you voted for at least one of them. And as I understand it, it's not impossible. You could end up having a chance to vote for another one. So, Ron DeSantis and Casey DeSantis, the 46th governor of Florida and the First Lady of Florida. Now, as you probably know, make sure I'm speaking closely into this. As you've noticed, I like to make people laugh, but I want to begin things on probably the most somber note you possibly can. After recent experiences in recent years, I think that one of the universal experiences of modern life is losing someone you care about to cancer. So I do want to take a quick survey of the room. If you've lost someone you care about to cancer, raise your hand.
Oh my gosh.
It's just about everybody.
Unbelievable.
So the DeSantis family has had its own frightening experience with Big C. You're both here. I'm very glad to see that. And I suspect as a factor, that was a factor in creating the Florida Cancer Connect initiative, a central resource hub for cancer patients, caregivers, and loved ones of those impacted by cancer. Would you guys mind telling us a bit about your experience, how that came about, and how it's going?
Yeah, well, many of you may or may not know, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was the end of 2021 in October. It actually is an interesting story because people are like, did you go in for your annual mammogram and how did you find out? And it's weird because I actually had like a feeling, like not like a physical something that I could touch, just something inside me didn't seem quite right. And so I ended up going to my doctor and I said, yeah, whatever. She felt around and she's like, you're good to go, no problems. I don't feel anything, whatever. And I walked out the door and I got in the car and actually drove back to Tallahassee, which was a 2-hour drive. And I'm thinking something's not right, but she never recommended that I got a mammogram. Had I not had advocated for myself and fought for a mammogram because something inside me was like, I just don't feel right. Honestly, I don't even know if I would be sitting here right now. And so I was very fortunate, but and also keep in mind, we had a 4, 3, and 1-year-old at the time when I was diagnosed. So fortunately, I got help. I went in, and then I realized, and I don't know if you saw that on TV, but how many people raised their hands? Everybody raised their hand. They have lost somebody to cancer. We are at war with cancer, right? So I looked at myself as, we have the position as First Lady of the state of Florida, which I'm nobody special, but man, you can do a lot of good with that position. So one of the things I realized very quickly is it's hard to find the resources, right? Where do you go to look? What kind of doctor provides what services? So we started with that by creating a collaborative where we made it possible for people to navigate through the resources that are available in Florida. Then the legislature, with the leadership of the great governor, appropriated a lot of money going to cancer. But I wanted to make sure, and I appreciated that. They actually named it the Casey DeSantis Cancer Fund, which you never want to have something like that named after you, right? But in any event,
like Lou Gehrig's disease.
Right, it's like, what, but you can do so much good with that, right? And so I went in, but we wanted to have accountability over the funds, right? There's like $126 million in that fund. But what I come to find out, there's some great hospital systems across the state of Florida. Wonderful. I got great treatment at a place called Moffitt. But when you look at the formula of how that money is allocated, Right now, it only goes to a few hospital systems. 90% of the cancers are treated exteriors of those specific hospitals. And I'm saying, man, if I'm fighting, or I have a loved one fighting for them, their lives, they should be able to have better quality of care. They should be able to utilize those funds to have a better experience and to have better outcomes. So we did that. We also did an innovation fund where now we do grants quarterly. We don't wait until the fiscal year, because why do you need, we need to move quick. We do quarterly grants for different research and innovations that sometimes they didn't have the oxygen to be able to get the opportunity to get these funds, because they might not have professional grant writers, or they don't know the people at NIH, and they can't, do whatever. So we made it possible for them to be able to apply, get the funds quickly, find out if it's working, great. If it's not working, great, let us know. We also are tearing down the hospital walls to say, okay, if there's a great procedure over in this hospital should know too. There shouldn't be a competitive model, right? We need to work together to better outcomes. We also talked about data in this collaborative. Now we have them reporting, the hospital systems, to our ACA secretary as quickly as possible to know, okay, where are we with rates and reoccurrence rates? What are we seeing? What innovations are working? So we're really trying to do what we can to hold ourselves accountable to outcomes, but being good stewards to the taxpayer, and then also trying to provide opportunities for people to be able to have the best outcome possible in the war against cancer.
Governor, you'd like to add anything?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say it as good as that, but I just go back to when she did go to get this checkup. It was something that she felt strongly about, and so I encouraged her to do it, and she did it, and she was basically given a clean bill of health. And so, if I was in the doctor and they said you're fine, I would never think twice about it. I would just go out, and that would be it, right? She just had the feeling that was not the final word, and that she needed to get a mammogram. And my was like, listen, I think you're fine. The doctor said, and she fought. And had she not done that, the outcome could have been really, really bad. So I just think it's a lesson. Her experience, and we went public with it just because we're public figures, and her experience and how she overcame it, it's been inspirational to a lot of women, not just in Florida, but all over the country. And she's been able to parlay that in a lot of good. So that's the bright side of having gone through it.
Yeah, and I would just double down on that. So I had 6 rounds of chemotherapy, 6 weeks of radiation, and 3 surgeries. And I'm here to say you can beat it, right? I hope that I serve as a model of inspiration for folks to know that we really are getting good at treating cancer, right? The challenging part, is going through the process, but you can do it.
On a somewhat related note, you guys have established the Hope Florida Initiative, which is designed to connect community collaboration between the public and private sector, faith-based communities, and nonprofits. Either of you, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what I like to tell people is we pride ourselves on being the free state of Florida. And one of the reasons why we can say that is because I take it as my responsibility, amongst other responsibilities, managing natural disasters, making sure, the laws are administrative properly, all these things. But one of the things I do as a leader is I take it upon myself to protect Floridians from the pathologies of the left. So if the left is trying to take over or has taken over K-12, we don't accept that, and we want to roll back, and we have rolled back. Universal school choice, paycheck protection for teacher union dues, eliminating woke ideology from our schools. We've done all of that, and we were the first in the country to do any of that stuff. If you look at what we've done on immigration, I came in, state that has a significant percentage of Latino voters, and one of the first things I did was get the legislature to ban sanctuary cities. They said, oh, you can't do that. The Latinos are going to hate you. Turns out, the Latinos in Florida approved of my actions more than any other group did. And now it's gone all the way now. And we've had other things. We sent people to the border. even sent some illegals to Martha's Vineyard, and that didn't last long because they didn't tolerate that, but we did that. Then, now I called the special session of the legislature to be able to require all state, and I'll require the state, but we have a legal duty for all local law enforcement to actively participate with immigration interior enforcement. So we're rounding up people all the time. You know, there's almost 1 million people in the United States now that are under final deportation order. So they've already had the due process, which I think it's ridiculous. You come across the border, due process, just send them back. That should be the law. But even if you want to do, they've already had it. So why not go there? So we're doing all that. You look at what we've done on universities. We don't believe that we should fund indoctrination camps. So we now have first state to eliminate DE&I from our public universities. We have all tenured professors must undergo review every 5 years and can be let go for poor performance. On and on it goes across the board. We understand that the left is not just active in the halls of legislative chambers. They want to control institutions. Corporate America. We were the state that nuked ESG before any other state did. We even went toe-to-toe with a corporation you may have heard of that happens to operate some theme parks in Florida, and no one had ever done that, and we were successful in doing that. So on all these things, we don't cede any ground to the left. And I think too many Republicans over the years, they basically cede all those institutions to the left, say, well, we'll lower your taxes more than the Democrats will. Maybe we'll do something, you know, be better on crime or a few other things. But by and large, the liberal elites are going to control all these major institutions. That doesn't work in Florida. We don't accept it. And so I remember Bill Buckley, when he came on the scene, said, you know, you have to, you know, stand in the way and say stop. Because I think American institutions at that time were generally healthy. And so if you stop the advance, that was really good. Now it's not enough to just stop the advance. You got to roll back. And that's what we've done in Florida. We've rolled it back. We don't cede it. So which brings me, and I'll let the First Lady talk about Hope Florida. We don't accept the Great Society construct when it comes to a social welfare system. These bureaucrats, their goal for decades has been try to get as many people on as many government programs as you can. And this is not my doing. This was her idea, and she really put it into practice. In Florida, we've turned that on its head. We don't say bureaucrats should be doing that. In fact, we've refashioned our bureaucrats into navigators, and their goal is to try to get people off public assistance. And so her Hope Florida program, it's been operational for less than 2 years. They've gotten 30,000 people off welfare programs and have saved the taxpayers over $100 million, and I'll let her explain how.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's, you know, and it really was Johnson, the Great Society's late 1960s when he had the war on poverty, and it was like, you know, great intentions. If we could snap our fingers and do it, great, but obviously you see the results. We've spent trillions of dollars, and are we legitimately helping people in need? And honestly, that was my perspective when I had the honor of becoming First Lady. It's like, what do you do with that, right? I go back to the Cancer Collaborative. And so going around the state and talking to a lot of people, you find out there's a lot of really good things that are happening within the communities, but they're all siloed, right? You got the faith-based here, you got the nonprofits, you have the private sector, you have state government, you have local government. And so how do we communicate and collaborate between the resources that are already there, exterior of government, to help navigate people on a pathway to economic self-sufficiency? And at first, when we started this, I didn't think like government was the right place for these navigators to be housed, because I was like, the last thing we want to do is grow government. We want to reduce the size and scope of government. But because of what happened with the Great Society, now the most vulnerable people were coming into government to try to get help. And so it's like, what do you do at that point? So with his point, with the navigators, now we transitioned people who were processing TANF grants, SNAP benefits, what have you, and now they're a part of the solution. Now they're saying, okay, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What's going on in your life? How are you doing? And then they look for resources exterior, meaning the nonprofits. If there's a great nonprofit, they'll tap into that. We're also the first state in the nation to utilize our faith-based community, okay? So we have 16.5 million people of faith across the state of Florida, 20,000 institutions of faith. We've always said they're the greatest untapped resource as it pertains to our work with government, but what role do they have? So now if you have that navigator, and let's say she's talking to a single mom who's really struggling, right? Instead of saying, here's your benefit, you know, hope it goes well, we'll see you later, now now can say, okay, you're having a hard time putting food on the table, and we can do, our navigators, an immediate electronic alert to our participating faith-based organizations, churches, synagogues, saying, hey, there's a single mom down the street, and she's really struggling. Can you help provide a meal or whatever? They see it in real time, and they show up at her front doorstep with a plate of lasagna to say, hey, I heard you were struggling. Now imagine, government's role has changed. It's become a communicator and a collaborator between good people in need of help, good people who are willing to help, but the two never knew that they were there. Meeting immediate needs is the first step, but helping people pass the fiscal cliff, helping them on a pathway to economic self-sufficiency is the ultimate goal. To his point, transitioning people off of government. So what we've been able to do through his leadership with vocational and technical and rapid credentialing and paid programs, paid apprenticeships, all of these things that we've done in the Department of Education, now we can show that single mom, and then also working with our private sector to say, okay, here's how much you're making in this job, but you know what? Here are the skill sets that are available, a lot of times for free through grants, to be able to get this job that this employer needs somebody for, but you're putting the pieces together, you're helping to make that happen. Then you get past the fiscal cliff, and you find a lot of folks want to do this. They want to show their kids they can be successful. They want to have hope. They want to see the American dream. It's just hard as heck to figure out how to get there, because it's like you could have the greatest programs in the world, but if you don't know that they exist, what good are they? So you make them easily digestible. The navigator takes on the burden for, let's say, that single mom and helps her to be ultimately happy and self-sufficient. And so the last thing I'll say before I go is, the neat thing about this is this philosophically different approach to government. We're helping people to veterans. Imagine if you have somebody showing up, the church showing up at a veteran's front doorstep with lasagna to say, hey, thank you for your service. Just imagine how far that goes, or people with unique abilities. And then also he mentioned the $1 billion we're saving. How about government stop waiting until there's a problem, then acting? The outcomes aren't as good. You're spending 10 times more money. What if we get in front of it? And we're doing that in a lot of ways. I'll give you one example, and then I'll stop talking. So within our one agency, when there is a allegation of abuse or neglect as it pertains to a child in the state of Florida, you send out what are called child protective investigators and law enforcement, right? But if they see that there isn't reason to take a child from the household, or there's no reason to press any criminal charges, but you see that that family is suffering, prior to him being in office, that would be where the story would end. Now we use this model to say, hey, y'all need some help? And the help is not government. The help is exterior. And now we help them, prevent them from getting on government assistance, and help them live up to their God-given potential. So I think it's a model through the states across the nation to make a difference and to legitimately help a lot of people who want help but are not sure where to turn.
Governor, you mentioned your dispute with that company with the mouse ears. And I strongly suspect that when they got into that disagreement with you, they own Marvel, they own Star Wars. They're one of the biggest companies in America, and I'm sure they felt they were too big to fail. And I want to thank you for teaching them that indeed, it is a small world after all. Those of us of a certain, there was a long build-up just to get to that joke. But anyway.
Well, I mean, I think it should be said, so the state of Florida since the late 60s was run by Disney. Like nobody, anything they wanted, boom, they would get. And so we had this debate over, I mean, it's incredible that we're even having a debate to say that, you know, in the state of Florida, a parent has a right to send their kids to elementary school without their kid being told that they were born in the wrong body or that their gender is a choice. Like, that's just like the basic foundation of what you would expect in a properly functioning education system. And they obviously disagreed. I think they had a lot of pressure from activists. I think that they probably understood this was not consistent with their fiduciary duty. Their shareholders wasn't smart in terms of business, but they did it. But, you know, a lot of people said the minute they came down on it that this would die. And I was like, no, you know, I've got young kids. You can count on me to stand up for parents and kids in this state. And so we signed the legislation. Their response was they were going to use resources to sue on the law, get it overturned in the legislature, courts, whatever they would do. They basically pledged to do a full-on assault against the Parents' Rights Bill, which, you know, look, is that consistent with their fiduciary obligation? I don't know. I think it's probably outside of that, but fine, they can do that. But You can't do it on our dime. And they were sitting on for 60 years this web of subsidies and privileges that was instituted to lure them there that really had changed into something that was never intended, to where they actually just ran the local government there in Central Florida. And you had other businesses they would tax, they'd use the money for their projects, all these other things. So we just said, listen, we're not going to have, this is not a viable thing anyways. Nobody, no conservative could accept this, but they were so powerful, no one ever did anything. So we said, we're going to take it away. You're going to operate under the same laws as Universal and SeaWorld and everybody else. No special privileges. We're not going to subsidize you weaponizing your corporate power against our kids and our that. A lot of cry about that. And look, even some people on the right, oh, let corporations do what they want and all this other stuff. And then people were saying, Disney should leave Florida, they're going to leave Florida and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, look, if they're going to move Space Mountain to Columbus, Ohio, they could try to do that. I don't think so. And so we stood up, we did the right thing, both in terms of the education, both in terms of the local government and taking away corporate welfare. And the result has been, they're now planning on spending $18 billion to enhance and create stuff with the parks. So you can stand and do the right thing, even if you get a lot of blowback, even if you get a lot of stuff. But ultimately, I think we showed that doing the right thing works, and you can take on these big battles and you can win. And the lesson of Florida, for people not from there, we've shown you can beat the left. Like, we always used to think that it was like just try to mitigate the damage the left's going to do, and we've shown that you can actually beat them across the spectrum.
That's an applause line. Those of us of a certain age can remember the 2000 presidential election and the late Tim Russert and his whiteboard saying, Florida, Florida, Florida. Florida is not only not a swing state anymore, Democrats have not won any statewide race since 2018. And I'm going to cite a figure that I suspect will be pleasing to you. In 2022, Charlie Crist raised $31 million to lose the governor's race by 1.6 million votes. Most of that money was spent on fans at the bottom of the stage to blow his hair the right way. But how does a state go from not just a swing state, for a while the swing state, to a deep red one that on behalf of all political correspondents, your race was over on election night as soon as the polls closed? Makes a very easy night for those of us. How do you do that? And can it be replicated?
Leadership and results.
Right.
I mean, that ultimately is what it is. It wasn't that we just had some ingenious voter registration effort, because if it was as simple as raising, $5-10 million to register voters, everyone would do what's happened in Florida. When I ran for governor in 2018, we had hundreds of thousands more registered Democrats than Republicans. We had never had more registered R's than D's in the history of the state of Florida. And the way it was trending, because of the demographics, people were saying Florida will be a blue state. That's what they were predicting. I ran in a blue year, 2018. We were able to win, but we won by less than 1% of the vote. And we had a U.S. Senate race decided by 0.1% of the vote. And then we even had a Democrat win the agriculture commissioner race, or at least was declared the winner. I think there was a lot of problems in Palm Beach and Broward counties, and I removed those supervisors of elections after that election, which they deserved to be removed for that. But that's kind of what I ran into. And so it was this political balance where for the previous decade, all these marquee races were like 1-point races. So people told me, listen, if you do anything to aggravate any of people that supported you and mobilize opposition, you're not going to be able to win again because it's so close, right? And that may not have been crazy advice, but it just happened to be advice that I rejected, because my view was you get elected, you can win by 1 point like I did the first time, or 20 points like I did the second time, but you wield 100% of the executive authority. You're the chief executive. You can set the agenda. And I'm swinging for the fences. I'm going to be bold. I'm going to deliver results. I've never taken a poll since I've been governor on any issue at any time, because my view is if I set the vision, if I execute the vision and produce the results, people will naturally gravitate to our side. So that's really what we did. And I do think having COVID, and there'd be such a contrast to Florida and Illinois and New York, there'd be business people in Chicago, they want to do a business deal. They would all fly to Florida, have dinner, be normal, do their business, and then they'd all fly back. They didn't want to be subject to these restrictions. I mean, I remember it was like Fauci, he hated restaurants being open. You must eat outside. You can't eat inside the restaurant. Okay, so they'd set up tables on the sidewalks. And in Chicago in August, that's probably relatively pleasant. Probably not as pleasant in December. So what do? Do they let people go inside the restaurant? No. They would build enclosures around the outdoor dining. So it's still outdoor dining. You just happen to be in this thing. So it was insane. And I think the contrast between us promoting freedom and rationality, schools being open, all these other things, and these others, I think that accelerated some of the trends that we started with. And then we took on the woke, we took on all these things, and it just built and built and built. And it's not just migration into Florida, which did skew Republican. So the 49 other states, if you look at the migration of their residents to Florida since I've been governor, all 49 states had more Republicans move to Florida than Democrats moved to Florida, which is remarkable, right? Because we used to think these New Yorkers coming down. I remember a year into COVID, a lot of my supporters, they would go around to the supermarkets, find New York plates, and they'd put flyers in the windshield. Don't vote down here like they vote up there. People were concerned. We won by 35,000 votes. If you have 50,000 liberal New Yorkers, maybe wouldn't. But the opposite happened. But then we had people in Florida switch to Republican in numbers that were 3-1, the opposite. Our brand became very strong, and it is very strong in Republican. So that's why you could take like Miami-Dade County, which is 70+% Hispanic, voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016 by 30 percentage points. Fast forward to my reelection, I won it by double digits, which nobody thought was possible. We won Palm Beach County. You want to talk about Bush versus Gore? That was like a 25% Gore county. All the hanging chads, they were trying to generate more Democrat votes down there. So you had all that. So Palm Beach red, Miami-Dade strongly red, Osceola, which is 70+% Hispanic, red, Tampa, all those areas red too. And it really was people just responded to the results. And that's the thing. And one of the things that's frustrating to me, kind of watching what goes on, particularly with Congress, but also some other places around the country with some of these Republicans, are you about performative theatrics or are you about substantive results? And I do think voters respond to substantive results because it's tangible and it's there. And it doesn't matter what the media says, they see it. And so we were fighting, we stopped any riots from happening in Florida when the other cities were burning down. You know, we protected people's jobs and livelihoods against the COVID mandates, the vax mandates, and these other things, and people saw that. So I do think it's substance. I don't think it's about clever marketing. I don't think it's just empty calories. It is something that has made a difference in people's lives. We've attracted people to move to the state of Florida who are like-minded. And we've also seen people switch over to become Republicans because of what we're doing. But in all of that, I don't think that that this is something that is solidified indefinitely. I think the success in Florida is very, very fragile. There's a lot of people that don't want to say it publicly, particularly in and around Tallahassee. There's a lot of people that don't like what we've done on the Republican side, that they don't like. And there's a lot of people that are just kind of waiting, like, we just got to get this guy out of here so that we can kind of go back to business. There is that sentiment out there, and you'd think like we've been the example that a lot of people, conservatives around the country, have pointed to, but I don't think that this is on autopilot that's going to continue in this direction. And so it just shows that the leadership's going to continue to matter.
We still have a decent amount of time left, but I want to take a moment to thank all of you for attending. I want to point out, when you go home, you get to tell all of your friends and neighbors, I went to the National Review Ideas Summit, and I got to see the governor of Florida do his Dr. Fauci impression. There is no other conference that gives you that experience. You'd mentioned Miami-Dade County, and in fact, when I think about the city of Miami, I think of the Dolphins, I think of the Golden Girls, and I think of Crockett and Tubbs. And yet, in the year 2023, Miami had 31 murders in the entire year. My understanding is in Chicago, they call that a quiet weekend. So what is working, when so many other big cities, particularly since the COVID pandemic, have seen this rise in crime, what's working down in your state, in Miami in particular, and can that be replicated in other states?
Well, I think what we do in the state is we're a law and order state. That's just the reality. We never bought into the so-called criminal justice reform, which was basically just trying to soften penalties on criminals, including some, really serious violent criminals. We also believe it's kind of like we do kind of like the broken windows theory that New York did just statewide. So like retail theft. You can go into California, you steal $999 in the store and you're scot-free. As long as you don't steal $1,000, they just kind of let you go. And I know they had finally passed a referendum where the voters put the kibosh on it, but that's what was happening. These retail shops are closing. We did the opposite. We cracked down on retail theft, particularly organized retail theft, because we understand how that contributes to lawlessness writ large. We passed legislation at my request to ban homeless encampments in public. So you're not allowed to, cities aren't allowed to allow homeless on the sidewalks, in front of businesses, harassing people in public parks, and they've cried about that, but that's just the reality. So we've had really strong policy in the state. But I'd also say this, you look at like Miami, the electorate down there, even though they used to be a very blue county, they are not receptive to soft on crime politicians. And they will vote you out if you do that. And so some of the things I see around the country, voters keep voting for these people. At some point, you can criticize the politicians, but if the voters are ratifying this over and over again, at some point that they bear responsibility. You have a lot of working class people, mostly Hispanic in Miami-Dade. They are not supportive of letting criminals out. Even the Democrats down there are not. So I think part of it is just a reflection of the electorate. And I know it was different 30, 40 years ago. There was a lot going on down there. A lot of that's been cleaned up. And then Miami just happened to be probably the #1 place with people were fed up with California, Illinois, New York. Miami was like the #1 place people thought about going to over the last 5 or 6 years. And so they've seen a tremendous influx of investment and wealth come into the city. That creates challenges too. But I do think that voters have demanded in Florida that we want to be law and order. And on immigration too. One of the legacy outlets went to Hialeah, which is 97% Hispanic, and they were like trying to say, well, Governor DeSantis called a special session. President Trump is saying mass deportations. Aren't you upset that you voted for these guys? And they're like, no, that's what we want. They're like, we want to see the law enforced. This is what you have to do to be a society based on the rule of law. So on immigration, they've been very strong in terms of wanting to see interior enforcement. And if you look at what happened in these other states, they're sanctuary states. So they're inviting this. They're weak on criminals. They're weak on homelessness. They're weak on public drug use. All this stuff contributes to a decline in the standard of living. And if you talk to realtors in Florida, maybe like a year into COVID, and say, what are people telling you? Why are they moving from these places to Florida? Wasn't because of taxes. I mean, that was probably a factor, but that's not what they were saying was the main factor. It wasn't even necessarily COVID. That was a factor. They wanted it free. Crime was the #1 thing people would say. They didn't feel safe in these communities anymore, and they felt safe in Florida. And part of it is because we back law enforcement. I mean, I remember I was in Southern California, one of the nice cities in Southern California. I met the police chief. I'm like, how's it going? He's like, I'm doing good. It's just every single one of my police officers want to move to Florida now, and it used to not be the case. But it does matter. So we've created, I think, a good culture in Florida, and we're at a 50-year low in the crime rate, and we intend to keep it that way.
So, Governor, you were elected in the first Trump administration, served under Biden, had quite a few disagreements there. In 2023, you had this little project, spent a lot of quality time in Iowa, and now you're back, Governor, with the Trump administration a second term. What's it like working with the Trump administration compared to the Biden administration, and are anything different this second time around, or?
Well, to say we worked with the Biden administration would probably be an abuse of language. We didn't really do that. We basically had to fight them across the board on issue after issue. I mean, I was at the signing for the Department of Education, unwinding whatever the president can do, he's going to do. I think ultimately Congress would need to shutter the agency. But when we did our women's sports protection bill 4 or 5 years, we were the first state, I think, to do that too. Biden responded to DOE by saying they were going to take away the lunch money for the poor kids, this free and reduced lunch money. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, man, these guys are really committed to this ideology that they would try to do things like that. I set up a program summer of 2021. We had coronavirus Delta wave that hit the Sun Belt. And I set up monoclonal antibody clinics. So literally these people would come, they'd get the monoclonal and it cured it basically. I mean, it was unbelievable success. And I had them all over the state, and we used our emergency management people. And then once it was clear that this was working and people were excited, Biden took away our monoclonal supply. I had to do a separate deal with a different company. So that's just kind of the way it was. The first Trump administration was good, but I think he's got a much more aggressive posture to devolve power to the states in the second term, because I think that he's reached a conclusion, which I agree with. You know, this bureaucracy up here is a huge, huge problem. It's wielding power the founders never intended it to wield. Part of that is because Congress, through their ineptitude, through their lack of assertiveness, have empowered this administrative state. But sending things to the states is a way to go around that. You honestly will save a lot of money, too. And I know that's a project that's ongoing. So send us education money, send us the FEMA money. Just give me the money and I'll handle the disaster, right? So I think you have that sense. It's good. But I'll tell you, I think back, so we have hurricanes in Florida, and so we prepare for them. My first year as governor, President Trump was in office, we had Hurricane Dorian, which any of you who visit the Bahamas know, it did a number on the Bahamas. It was a Category 5 storm, and it was basically barreling to the east coast of Florida. So we're all prepared. Now, I've studied all these storms. They typically do make a turn north and ride our coast rather than jam it. And fortunately, that's what ended up happening this time. So we did not get direct impact from that, but the Bahamas really did. So there was a guy in Palm Beach who had a boat, like this big, like, I don't know if it was a full cruise ship, but he would do voyages from Palm Beach to Freeport in the Bahamas. People would go, they'd party there, come back, and Freeport got leveled, so the business wasn't viable. So what he decided to do was raise a bunch of donations to bring Bahamians to Palm Beach County. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm the governor of Florida. I can't have tens of thousands of people deposited in South Florida. It would cost us massive amounts of money. We got a lot of people in Florida have relations with Bahamas. They'll want to help these people, and you can do that, but you do it over there. Well, he started doing these trips, and people are getting dumped, and like the locals didn't know what to do. We had to do. So I called the president. I said, listen, I can't do hurricane relief for the Bahamas and then also prepare for Florida, because we were in the midst of the season. I was like, can you stop these boats? And he's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, just talk to DHS, do that, tell them I said. So I do, and I'm kind of getting caught up in the bureaucracy. So they had dumped a couple thousand people one day. They were scheduled to go like 2 days later. So I'm working this issue, working it. I'm not really getting any luck. Hey, President said. So finally, like I got a message to him to say, like, we really need this. And so next morning, we're scheduled to have a bunch dumped. I'm in bed. It's like 12 o'clock. I get a call at 12:30, and he said, Ron, the boat is taken care of. Click. And no one ever heard from this boat ever again. And I think back to that because I know if Biden were president, he would have sent everyone to South Florida, and we would have had to deal with that. So having an ability to collaborate and being able on those issues, I think is very, very good. And I do think we're going to get a lot of authority to be able to do it our way. And I think he's very committed to getting the bureaucrats out of the way, which is good.
All right, it says in my notes here, Casey. I still feel like I should be calling you Mrs. DeSantis. But anyway.
Casey, whatever you want.
All right, you have played an integral role in this administration. I should point out, in addition to the National Review staff, there are reporters scattered around this room. My goal for this summit is to freak them out. And Governor Kemp was not cooperative last night. No talk about whether he's going to run for Senate, but that's fine. So, as you're aware, there is growing speculation you will run for governor. So, have you given that any thought? And can you make these reporters in this room freak out and run to go tell the editors you've got news?
Well, first of all, I mean, this guy's the GOAT. Like, honestly, like everything that he says he's going to do, he does, right? And, you know, I'm just sitting here listening to him, and he makes it sound really easy. Like, I did this, and I did this, and we did this, and now our voter registration is 1.2 million Republicans, more than Democrats, and we did this, and we turned the vote, and all of this stuff. Florida's the free state of Florida because you've got the GOAT in the governor's office because of one key thing: having a backbone. And when you have the opportunity to stand up for what's right, you're courageous and you put yourself into the arena and you fight like heck. And I'll tell you what, I've been around politics and I've seen a lot of people. Not a lot of people have a backbone like him. They get into office because they want to be somebody. They don't want to do good things. They don't want to get criticized. They like the cocktail parties. You know, they think about what's next on the next political rung in their career. Like, the founders never thought that politics should ever have been a career, right? You were supposed to go up and serve, and you come home and you live under the laws that you pass. But it's really changed. And so I have to just applaud him because all of what he has done is extremely fragile, right? Like, you could get somebody in and all of this revert back. And I'll tell you, Florida, like, in so many instances, it is the free state and it is an inspiration to a lot of other states across the United States, but having the opportunity to travel around the world, people across the globe know about what he has done and they are so proud. So it's the long-winded answer of saying, you know, we'll see, right? We'll see.
You know, it's interesting. I did an event with you guys, I think it was 2019 with Rush. So they gave Rush an award, and I was one of the guys that introduced Rush, and I was fortunate to get to know and be friends with Rush even before I got elected governor. And you know, we used to play golf and everything, and you know, he would always say, "Governor, don't ever go left," and we, although I did have a hook back then. So we became very friendly, and he was very proud of what we were doing in Florida. And I used to always kid him. You know, he said, "You don't have degrees at the Limbaugh Institute of Advanced Conservative Studies, no degrees awarded." I said, "Rush, I'm your home state governor, man. You got to give me an honorary degree. I'm the first, because I was 40 when I got elected. I was like, I'm probably the first, you know, kid who listened to you to then end up, you know, here." And so he said he didn't actually mint a degree. He said if he were to do it, that he would give it to the governor of Florida, his governor. But anyways, he got to know Casey. And I remember we were at an event with him, you know, probably, I don't know, maybe right before COVID or maybe after. He had, I don't know that he had been diagnosed yet. And she's just going on you know, because, you know, Rush would always say, you know, these politicians, their spouse moves them left, right? And that was something that he was concerned about. And she's just like, you know, raging against the machine. And he turned to me, you know, at the end, and he's like, she should be governor after that. So all I'm saying is, like, you know, my view is like, you know, she'd be great at whatever she does, but I've been the most conservative governor in America. I've delivered the most conservative results, and I think it'd say she would be as conservative or more conservative than me. So there you go.
Endorsed by Rush Limbaugh is a very nice slogan. I just want to point that out, particularly in Florida. We have about 2 minutes left, and I asked a version of this to the governor. I always like to ask people when they know a state really well. People might go to Disney World. They might go to the beaches. What is something great about your state, some great place to visit that people probably don't know about?
Well, I think if you go to some of the places that are considered like old Florida, and some of that can be on the interior. We've got a lot of towns that are centrally located, but we even have some of the coastal towns that are more of a throwback, not as commercialized, things that you almost feel like you're back in time. Those have a lot of charm. And look, our theme parks are great. Universal's opening up a new mega theme park in May. That's going to be really good. We've obviously got a lot of great coastline. We've got some of the best resorts in the world there, and there's a lot to do there. But some of the old Florida, you can go to some of these perfectly clear springs and swim, and literally you'll see people. If you're not from Florida, you get freaked out about this. There'll be people swimming in these freshwater springs, and there'll just be alligators on the other side of it just sitting there, and people just do it. You know, you go in and do. So we have a lot of those types of things that I think is really
The governor of
neat.
Florida just told you to swim with alligators. I think even Charlie Cook's like, nah, I'm out. And I go to Ukraine and Syria. That sounds risky to me, okay? You know?
So to check out some of the places that are off the beaten path, and then if you're on one of the coastal towns, I mean, you know, they will bring in the seafood, and depending on what type of season, you know, you can do the stone crabs. We have great grouper, particularly, you know, on the Gulf Coast. So there's so much stuff in terms of that would have been probably commonplace 60, 80 years ago. You know, the state's changed a lot, and there's been benefits to that, but there's also some drawbacks, and we want to maintain that character as well.
You know what I like doing? I like hunting pythons in the Everglades. It's true. You don't know if you know about that. There's this invasive species. So he's done so much more than any other governor to try to clean the water coming out of Lake O and to help the Everglades and to do all of these major restorations for sane environmental policies. But one of the problems are the critters. They're getting eaten up by the pythons in the Everglades. And so there's a way to go out and do this, to get these things. Technology is getting a little better, but up until this point, how you would go hunt for pythons in the Everglades, I think you can do this. Like, I think there are services that'll take you out if you want to go, you know, get these big snakes and go on a, you know, vacation to the Everglades and wrangle a python. But what they do is they get a very big stick, and they go around the Everglades and they tap on the shrubbery and they go in there and they grab them by the neck. And now I'm not really going to do that, but you can watch from the sidelines. But I mean, honestly, Florida's like, it is, you know, ever since I was little, I always looked to Florida as this magical place, right? It's like, you know, the vacations and the beaches and everything, the orange juice, everything. It's just been wonderful. And so, but the pythons, if you got a bucket list, I mean, honestly, go check. It's kind of fun. I'm not going to lie.
And you also we do serve a fried gator tail that you can get in most places in
Tastes like
Florida.
chicken.
So if you've never had it, you should try it. It's a little tougher version of Chick-fil-A, I think, but they got good sauce, so it all works out in the end.
You know, I didn't know what answer I was going to get to that, but swim with the alligators and wrestle and hunt down the pythons was not what I was expecting. Ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful couple, the DeSantises.
Thanks.